Church for the one. Come on. Hey, I am so honored today that Kevin would trust me with this platform, with the message of God today, with this microphone. Will he regret giving the microphone to an Australian? Probably. At some point, but I'm honored anyway. Hey, I want to welcome you, every single person in this room, everyone that is watching online specifically. I want to welcome Ward in Pennsylvania, Maya in Gainesville, Michael in New York, Cindy in Delray Beach, and my parents-in-law, Tippy and Scott Mahan in Seattle. Come on, church, can you help me? Welcome everyone that's watching today. I'm so grateful for our pastors. I'm so grateful for Kevin and Bethany that they haven't just welcomed me into this community, but they have welcomed me into this family. And when I moved to Lakeland, I had no idea that I would be stepping foot into the community that I had been praying years for. And we don't know the battles that they pray about, that they fight on our behalf behind our backs. I'm just grateful that they do. So church, for just this moment, can we take a moment to show our gratitude to God for Kevin and Bethany Jack? I'm really grateful. I love you guys so much. And while you're standing, let's read from the Bible. Feels like a good text for me to base the sermon out of today. We're going to read from Joshua chapter 1, and it says this in verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. I'll give you every single place you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and very courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go. And I want to read one short verse, a parable from Matthew 13, verse 44. And it says, the kingdom of heaven, this is Jesus speaking, is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And in his joy, he went and sold all he had to go and he bought that field. Church, in this third part of our Cultivate series today, I want to speak a message with the title, Go Before You Know. Church, can we thank God for the reading of his word today? And as you do, high five a few people, fist bump them. All my introverts, I believe in you. You can do this. And then take a seat. Thank you, team. Church, have you ever played out in your imagination a scenario that's about to take place in your life, and you go through it in your head about what could happen, but in your head, you accidentally make it the ideal situation? Nothing goes wrong when you imagine it right in your head. Like you're preparing to talk to your crush and you've been really trying for weeks and they're here at church on Sunday, and so you imagine it in your head and you imagine it like they laugh at all of your jokes and they give you the eyes of like, please ask me out, and it just goes so well, and that happens in your head. Or you have a work presentation coming up, and while you're going through the scenarios in your head, it goes so well that your boss gives you a promotion like right there on the spot. And seemingly, because it's your imagination and you get to decide what happens, he also makes sure that Steve from accounting, who is your work nemesis because of that one time that he ate your lunch, even though it clearly had your name on it in the Tupperware, he makes him report to you now in your imagination. Or you just put an offer in on that house on Lake Hollingsworth, and you can already imagine your family moving into it and going for walks around the lake and doing your devotionals, you know, because we have to kind of make it spiritual. And you know that for sure they'll come back to you in your mind, you imagine it, and they don't only accept your offer, but they actually say, hey, can we give you the house for less than you originally asked us for? We just heard that you go for church to church for the one. And you're like, that's weird, but okay, yeah, in your head, like it's perfect. But then reality interrupts you. Don't you hate it when reality interrupts your perfectly laid out plans of how life is supposed to go? When you talk to your crush and she's already seeing someone, or the work presentation, it goes fine, but you don't even get a promotion, so Steve from accounting can continue his petty theft. And the offer that you put in at Lake Collingsworth, well, they come back to you and they not only deny you, but they ask you to please stop putting in offers because their house isn't even up for sale. And you're like, oh, all these ideal situations, and you're left sitting there saying the famous words from Will Smith in Hitch, I saw this going differently in my mind. Do you remember that scene? Well, I am here today not just to preach the word of God, but to tell you I'm about to take the title for Queen of I did not see 2024 going this way in my mind. Try to fight me for it, but here's why. This time last year, I was living in the OC in California, just minding my own business, okay? I had just been introduced to a single dad that lived in Lakeland, Florida, who was on staff at a church called Highland Park Church, okay? Fast forward a year, I am now married to said single dad, who is no longer a single dad. I have 2 daughters. I am on staff full-time at Church for the One, and somewhere in there we decided to plant a campus in North Lakeland. Sounds fun, right? But it was not on my bingo card for 2024. When we got married in October of this year, just about 2 months ago, I actually think we have a photo of our wedding, of our little family. There they are. That's me in the white dress. It's Tim Mahan, our North Lakeland pastor and husband of me. And our 2 little girls, there's Zara, she's 6, and Milan, who's 4, and they are the sassiest things on the planet. They're not my biological daughters, but I look at their personalities someday and I'm like, oh no. Any mums that tell your daughters, just wait till you get older and have one of you, I'm having 2 of me. So pray for me. After our honeymoon, Tim and I decided that it could be really cool to take our family on a family moon, just to celebrate the official us becoming a family. It's a big transition for the girls. We just wanted to celebrate it. And the second that the idea popped into our mind and I started planning it, I was so excited. I was convinced I was about to plan the perfect family moon of any family moon that has ever occurred, okay? It was obviously going to be at Disney World because there's no other place that it should have been. I immediately booked the Little Mermaid room at the Imagination Resort at Disney World, and then I reserved us. I got a special reservation at Cinderella's Castle at Magic Kingdom for breakfast with the Disney princesses. Hello. Best stepmom of the year right here, all right? Self-proclaimed. And so I'm planning the whole thing. I even titled the family moon. I titled it Family Moon 2024. Mahan Mayhem. Like, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I was gonna get t-shirts, I just forgot. You know what I mean? So I'm planning the whole thing. It was so much fun. I actually think we have a photo of it as well here. Yeah, that's it. That's the one. Yeah. Yeah, you get it. It was a mix of sugar highs and roller coasters, and this was the reality that interrupted my perfectly laid out plans. Okay? This feels like there should be a narrator over voice, like Lizzie McGuire thing. Like, let me take you back to the very beginning. Let me tell you how this had happened. God bless you, Milan. Early in the morning, it was going so well, okay? We had woken up in our Little Mermaid bedroom, and that absolutely cost the kids' college fund, so it was only gonna be one night. And things were going fine, and the girls are getting dressed. We're trying to hurry to get to breakfast with Cinderella and the princesses, and right before we're about to leave, Tim, God bless him, he made the mistake of calling Milan Princess Belle. Now look, I get it. She's wearing the Princess Belle dress, so you would think that that made sense that he called her Princess Belle, but what you don't know is right before this, Milan had mentioned and announced to everyone that she was Elsa dressed up as Princess Belle, so only to refer to her as Elsa, so when Tim called her Princess Belle, it was naturally child abuse, and she wasn't gonna have it. She was gonna stand up, stick it to the man, you know? So that takes us another 15 minutes and our entire emergency supply of candy for the day, but we're back rolling and now we're running really late. So we decided to drive to Magic Kingdom to save some time, which if you've been to Disney World, you know that in fact cost us time because there's no such thing as pull up and park at Magic Kingdom. You have to take a ferry there. And on the way in the ferry, Tim realizes that we haven't reserved our place at Disney World for the day. Yeah, I know. So we have annual passes, and that was Tim's one job. And I'm a newlywed, so I'm not here to place blame, but was it his fault? So, So then, you may not know me yet, but I don't know the meaning of the word no. So we get there and I find the first Disney person I can, and I sort it out because women, we just know how to do stuff, guys. I don't know what to tell you. But we are running to get to Cinderella. I literally feel like Cinderella and the clock is about to strike midnight. Tim has Princess Belle Elsa under his arm and she's crying and has glitter somehow all over her face. How do children find so much glitter and where does it all come from? We have Zara, whose one shoe has fallen off and she's sweating, and that's tough. For a 6-year-old to sweat, they got to do a lot of stuff. So that was quite impressive. So we get there, and Tim and I are just questioning all of our life decisions, honestly. But we get there, sit down at breakfast, and I am certain the girls, they have to be starving at this point. No. The breakfast that cost us a down payment on a house in Lakeland was sitting there on the table, the cereal and Mickey Mouse shaped waffles that I could have made at home for $7.50. So Tim and I were like, look, we might not have a house anymore, but we will have full bellies. So we eat the girls' breakfast there. We start saying hi to the princesses. The princess from Brave reprimands me. We don't know her name. No one knows who she is. She doesn't have the authority to reprimand me, just so you know, but she does. We leave there, go on the Dumbo ride. I'm trying not to throw up 3 people's breakfast, and it is just a mess. I saw it going so differently in my mind, And so at this point, it's lunchtime, and the day parade is about to start, and it feels like we've been in Disneyland, Disney World for 74 years at this point, and it's been 3 hours. So we're there, and we're exhausted. And then the parade starts, and Princess Belle comes out on the float, the real Princess Belle, the one that's not confused about her identity. She comes out on the float, and she sees Mahan in her princess dress, and she bows to Mahan, and it's magic. It is. And Mahan suddenly doesn't get mad at Princess Belle. She decides to take on the identity of Princess Belle, and then the prince comes out and he sees her in her princess dress and he bows to Mahan. And I think to this day that she still thinks she's married to that prince, which is another issue that Tim will have to deal with later on, not me. And then these evil creatures come out, and I don't know what movie they're from, but they start moving towards Mahan and Zara, and so the girls take out their wands and do this little thing to them, and the evil creatures go back, and the girls are convinced that they are the strongest humans on the planet, and this parade happens, and it is magic. And I look at Tim, and I'm like, we've got to plan another trip. Disney World, man. Elyse, what is your point? Well, my therapist, Wendy, told me that I have got to stop bringing that story up in therapy and that I need to tell someone else. So this is my attempt at doing the work, So that's the first thing. But the second thing, and the thing that I am here for today, is to remind someone that just because there have been a few meltdowns in this last season doesn't mean that God's not moving. Just because things haven't gone to your plan doesn't mean that they haven't gone to his plan. And what we focus on is the seed that has been sown, and that is what will be harvested. And so you can choose to focus on the meltdowns, or you can choose to focus on the magic. Either way, he will have his way, and you get to decide what you are cultivating in between the wilderness and the promised land. See, we're in a series called Cultivate, and we're going to look at the journey between Egypt and the promised land. And today, I get the honor of taking this passage of scripture, the baton exchange between Moses and Joshua. And while I am so grateful for it, church, I have a problem. Not with the scripture itself. I still believe in the word of God. There's less and less of us, but I still believe that it is true and infallible. But My problem today is this is a pretty well-known verse, no? This be strong and very courageous moment that Joshua has with God. And the problem that I have is that most of you in this room, most of you watching online, you know the story. You know about Joshua. You know he takes the Israelites and they get to the promised land. You know about the walls that fall. And even if you don't, the passage I read is from the book of Joshua. So you can probably deduce that things go pretty well for him. So much so that he has a whole book named after him. Maybe you don't know the stats of Joshua. Let me give you some. He took over from Moses, but before that, he was Moses' assistant from a very early age. He would go everywhere that Moses went. If Moses went up the mountain, Joshua would go up the mountain. When Moses came down, Joshua came down the mountain. When Moses went into the tent to meet with God, Joshua went into the tent to meet with God. When Moses left the tent to go with the people, Joshua stayed in the tent because he knew, I don't need to be anywhere else except the presence of God. Because how many people know that sometimes it's those private moments in the tent when no one is looking that God is preparing on the inside what he has for you and years later on the outside. He went everywhere. He won battles underneath the leadership of Moses. There's this one battle, it's so cool. And Moses is on this mountaintop, and while his hands are raised up, Joshua is winning the battle of Amalek. He saw from the early young age of a boy into a man what it looked like, the cost of leadership, the weight of leading the Israelites. And even after this baton exchange, even after he becomes the leader of the Israelites, there's so many more cool Instagram-worthy moments. Like I just said, the walls of Jericho, they start shouting like a bunch, and the walls fall flat. They take the city, and then they take every single other city. If you like a good action movie, read the book of Joshua. Plenty of battles there. 300 looks like nothing compared to the book of Joshua. It gets crazy. There's this other moment that we're going to talk about next week, and Joshua tells the sun to stand still because he needs some more time to fight a battle. That's crazy. And the sun listens. That's wild to me. That is the Joshua that we read about. And so we see this hero, we see this battle warrior, this one that knew how to wield a sword, who knew how to take territory. And the problem with that is that we discount the process. See, when you know the end of someone's story, the scary bits look a little less scary. When you know that someone took the promised land, it takes the tension out of it a little bit, right? And that's the problem with the Bible, is that sometimes we see these Bible heroes as these sanitized versions. And so today I feel like my mission is to help see Joshua, not through the eyes of a Bible hero, but as a human like you and me. And maybe if we can relate to him as a human, we can learn some of these lessons. And the passage starts off, and God intervenes from heaven. He looks at Joshua chapter 1, and he says, Moses, my servant, is dead. At first glance, looks a little cold, a little callous of God. Imagine me standing up at a funeral being like, my friend Bethany is dead. On your way, as you were, thank you for coming. Like, you would be like, this was a terrible eulogy. I hate it here. Please let me go and grieve elsewhere. At first look, what God does, it doesn't have any emotion. Like, why is God intervening from heaven to tell Joshua something that he was well aware of, that Moses was dead? But then I go, wait a second. God doesn't waste his words. So could it be that Joshua knew that Moses was dead in theory, but he refused to accept the reality? How many of us have held on to a season that God has closed the door on for way longer than the grieving period? How many of us have taken a grieving season and made it a cycle? And God closed the door on that job, on that relationship, on that opportunity, on that past. And 30 days later, you are still staring at the closed door, looking for an opening instead of moving your eyes to look at where he is taking you. I wonder if they were still looking for Moses to come back down the mountain. See, Moses died on top of the mountain, but I wonder if you are the Israelites. If I'm an Israelite, I'm like, whatever. I've seen this before. Let it play out. He goes up and he comes down. Especially if you're Joshua. Joshua has been with him when he has done that. So Moses goes up the mountain and dies, but they're still maybe looking for him around. So they're taking these 30 days of grief, which was part of their culture, but I wonder how much they're actually grieving and how much they're secretly looking, waiting for things to go back to normal. Where in your life are you still waiting for the past to come back to the present? And God has said, I need you to understand that is done. That is gone. I closed the door for a reason. Moses, my servant, is dead, but I have never left you. And if you place your faith and trust in a human, you will never see the promised land. Just because Moses is dead does not mean that my promises are. And church, I came to tell someone today, I came to tell somebody that is watching online today that I know that that person broke your heart, but quit having them on speed dial. I know that that job is no longer, but quit looking at it and playing the victim and being tethered to your past. You can be tethered to your past or you can be tethered to your future. And I believe that God would say to someone in this room today, someone at home today, that Moses, my servant, is dead, but I am well and truly alive in the promised land. Didn't die with him. We've got to get up after God closes the door on a season. See, just because Moses had died didn't mean that the promises had died. And isn't that the temptation? I wonder if the greatest enemy to getting to the promised land isn't actually our Egypt. Maybe you're newer around here today. What I mean by that is before the Israelites came into the wilderness, which is where they had been for 40 years, and it was like an 11-day trip, I think, to the promised land from Egypt, which is a wild rerouting from Syria, if you ask me. But God got them out of slavery and I guess had to get some slavery out of them, which took a little bit longer than usual, but doesn't it always? And so here they are wandering around in the wilderness, but maybe your Egypt is where you used to be. The addiction that you used to have. The coping mechanisms that you had laid down. That old relationship. Not knowing Jesus. I don't know what your Egypt is, but somewhere along our sanctification process, which is just a fancy word to say knowing Jesus and becoming like him, somewhere in there, we're in this awkward place of I'm not where I used to be, but I'm not where I know that God has called me to be. And maybe that's the greatest temptation of the enemy, is if I can keep them not where they used to be, but not where God's called them to be, then I can actually quench their destiny that God has for them. As long as they don't feel their fullest potential, then I'm happy with that. So I'm not sowing bad seeds anymore, just not sowing any. I'm not waking up with a hangover. I'm not at the club on a Saturday night anymore. I even come to church sometimes, but you're really sowing in. I'm not where I used to be with all of these bad attitudes and bad habits, but where are the positive things that look like Jesus? Where is the forgiveness of that person that you keep justifying away? The greatest temptation of the enemy, I believe, is not in making us stay in Egypt, but it's stopping us and making us settle in the wilderness so we never get to the promised land. And I believe in this moment, God was telling Joshua, I need you to keep moving. Because if you settle here, you'll never get to where I am taking you. And let me tell you this, that God has a promised land for every single one of us. And so that's where Joshua stands. At the crossroad between where I've been and where God is trying to take me. That the thing that got them here was not going to be the thing that would get them there. And so God is such a good coach that he doesn't just motivate, he instructs. So he tells Joshua, he's like, be strong and courageous. I'm going to be with you every single place you go, everywhere you step your foot. I'm giving you territory. And then he instructs. So now go and cross the Jordan. He gives him something that Joshua can do. But church, this is where we sanitize it, because That's a really big body of water. And jet skis are not a thing. And neither are kayaks. It's like me telling you to go down to Lake Hollingsworth right now and cross it. Not run around it and show everyone how fit you are. Not go across it in a kayak or a canoe or a jet ski. Not swim across it. Walk across Lake Hollingsworth. You think I'm crazy? You're not super far off, but actually not because of what I just said. We sanitize. That the very direction that Joshua was given from God was something that was completely impossible. See, I found that God will often give us the where or the how, but he'll very rarely give us both. Why? Because there's no formula to this thing called faith. There's just complete reliance on the one who can direct us and then take us further than we can on our own. Jeremiah 29:11, God speaks to Jeremiah and he says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord. Plans to prosper you, to give you the future that you've always hoped for." I think there's something very critical in that verse that God speaks to Jeremiah and that you and I have gleaned so much from. And it is the piece where God says, "I know the plans that I have for you." Not you know the plans that I have for you. You see, when God instructs us, we need to have the courage to obey without demanding the rest of the information. Where has God given you half of the picture? And instead of saying, "I'm gonna go," instead of doing what Joshua did and actually starting to obediently walk towards the Jordan, even though he had no idea how he was gonna cross it, where is God doing that in your life? The thing that doesn't make sense, the thing that you have no idea how to do. What is God calling you to do? You see, in order to step out when we're uncertain, it's gonna mean that we have to let go of something that we like to hold on to. And that thing is control. Man, I love a good white knuckle on control. I actually wasn't even planning on bringing up control in this sermon, except that I kept having meltdowns when I was writing this sermon. Ain't it just like God to set you up for a sermon that's being preached to yourself rather than to anyone else? And suddenly I'm faced with this reality that, Elyse, you like being in control. You don't like stepping out when you're uncertain. And the craziest thing is, if I'm honest, the greatest moves of God in my life, the things that I look back on and I'm like, oh my gosh, God showed up so much in that season. I never felt closer to God than when I was there, was the moments that I released control and stepped out into something uncertain. And the crazy, ironic thing is, the seasons where I have felt the most anxiety, the most overwhelmed, the most exhausted from bearing the weight of the world on my shoulders that I never created, was the moments that I am trying to grip onto control. When I, as a Christian, am taking God's name in vain by slapping the word God told me on something that I actually manipulated because I wanted to create an outcome, because that's really what I had as my life plan in my mind. How many of us have manipulated the outcome of situations because the thing that God asked us to do was just a little too risky? So suddenly, I come back to God telling Joshua to be strong and courageous, and it takes on a whole new meaning for me. You see, Joshua knew how to fight in a battle. He knew how to fight in a battle when Moses was the leader, and he would fight in 31 battles or something like that to take the promised land. Joshua was no stranger to wielding a sword to defeat the enemy. So I doubt that God was telling Joshua, be strong and courageous in battle. I wonder if God was saying, be strong and courageous and surrender. What if the thing that takes the most courage is the thing that feels the most vulnerable? So you know how to argue. You know how to debate your faith. Do you know how to listen? I get it. You know how to come to church. You know how to serve in church. But when was the last time you built a friendship with someone that didn't know Jesus? I get it. You know how to make money. You know how to create businesses and create success. Do you know how to sow generously into the kingdom of God and take your hands off the outcome? What is the thing that you feel like when you step out into it, your knees are shaky, that you have no idea how God is going to come through. I believe, church, it's in the uncertainty that we find our courage. For the first time, Joshua is being asked to do something that he doesn't know how to do. Remember the Red Sea? When God parted the Red Sea, that was a Moses thing. And now Joshua is being asked to come to the edge of something that he cannot fight with a sword. What if it is in the uncertainty that God is asking us to have courage? To say yes to the whisper that you feel but you're scared to acknowledge. To say yes to Jesus even though you have questions. To believe again for that child that you stopped believing for. To believe again for the family, for the marriage, for the God idea that if you're honest, you hid away. To release control. To admit that you're afraid, but move towards the Jordan anyway. Because that's my story. And honestly, if this message isn't for you, it's for me. So I gave you Joshua's stats, but I grew up in Sydney, Australia, a pastor's kid, and 10 years ago, well, I hopped off the plane at LAX with my dreams in a cardigan. And a WWJD bracelet because, like I said, church kid. And I began building a life and building a church there in Los Angeles. I wrote a book and was seeing God do some incredible things in a city that can seem so dark so much of the time. I was so proud of the life I was building. And then in 2017, I got married and divorced in the same year, publicly and in ministry. And that's when your ministry comes to a halt. It's where my life comes to a halt. There is no filter for something like that. So yeah, I know the feeling of God having to intervene from heaven and saying, Moses, my servant is dead. It is time to get up. Because in my opinion, and I don't know the walk that you have had to walk or the story that you have in your life, but me seeing my husband walk out after he promised me forever, it's a pretty devastating situation. And somewhere in that spiral of heartbreak, though I went back to Australia for a few months and healed in the best way that I could, I got some incredible therapy. I allowed my family and my community and my church was incredible at that time to hold me together, to heal these broken pieces of my heart. When I came back to Los Angeles, I was still doing ministry, but if I'm honest, I was helping other people get to their promised land. I didn't think that God had a promised land for me anymore. It's really easy to do ministry. Sometimes the pulpit is the perfect place to hide. So there I was building our church in 2020, became the executive pastor, actually hired 2 people from Lakeland, Florida to come and work at the church, at Oasis Church. And at the same time, my lead pastor was starting to challenge me that there were these media doors that were opening to me, and media was not something I ever thought that would be a part of my story, but in my mind's eye, neither was everything else that had happened. So I was like, might as well give it a try. So came off staff and began to work for MGM Studios in their faith division and had a podcast and got to interview people. And it was just a strange, bizarre season of being on these red carpets as these pastors' kids and being like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Cool movie, I guess. Like, have you ever felt like you're in a situation that you were completely ill-equipped for, and yet I was saying yes to Jesus, but if I'm honest, there were miracles happening, but not the promised land that I knew that he had for me. Miracles still happened in the wilderness. And me and my best friend started this ministry because after the pandemic, we noticed people weren't going back to church. And I don't know about you, but I still believe that the local church is the hope of the world. I still believe that the local church is the movement that God uses and the vehicle that he wants to build his people, build their faith, build a movement of people that would do good and be Jesus to people. But then last year, in the middle of a whole bunch of circumstances, I felt the shift again. You know, that restlessness when you know the season's coming to an end. And in a state of having a broken heart after a breakup, my best friend took me down to Huntington Beach, California, to a lifeguard stand, and she challenged me. And she said, you have stopped moving towards your promised land. You have allowed not just the divorce that happened all those years ago, but the breakup that happened recently to stop you asking God and believing God for the promised land that He had for you. And you're helping everyone else move to their promised land, but what about you? Elyse, you have laid down your life for ministry, but you stopped laying anything down for a marriage and a family. You see, every year that would pass after my divorce, I'd be like, I don't have a baby. And I know that's not all that life is about, but every year that passed, I'd be like, I could have a child this year old, or 2 years old, or 4 years old. It had been 6 years, and I was so disappointed that I had started denying that it was a desire. And then this moment came where I had to surrender, just like Gabe talked about in that testimony video. And guess what? It's not just us that have to do that. We all have a moment where being strong and courageous looks like laying down the weapons and allowing God to do the miracle in front of you. So I entered into this sabbatical season and just trusted God to do the very thing that felt most vulnerable for me. And then November last year, a friend of mine reached out to me and said, have you ever met a guy? He's a single dad in Lakeland, Florida. He's a pastor on staff at Highland Park Church. And I said, I'm not in the right season for it because I'm a little dumb and it takes me a few times to know that God's speaking to me, to be honest. And then about a week later, Dr. Bethany Thomas, who I had randomly met at a retreat a few years earlier, but I don't believe in randomness when it comes to God. I'd emailed her right after the retreat and she had lost it, you know. But in the same way that it wasn't Tim's fault that he forgot to reserve our park tickets at Disney World, but it's fine. It's not an important piece of information that she didn't respond to my email all those years ago. It's just an interesting piece of information. I'm kidding. Anyway, she calls me and she's like, Elyse, have you ever met Tim Mahan? And I'm like, did you talk to Layla? And she's like, I don't know Layla. And so we started talking, and it was in this surrender that I was like, God, is this you? And if it's you, get me a job in Lakeland and I'll move. You know how we do that? There's this verse in Philippians 4:6-7, and it's become one of my life verses, and it talks about anxiety. And it says, don't be anxious. Present your requests to God, and then what happens? The peace of God that surpasses understanding will guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. It's just the word of God. I wonder if our world is so starved for peace because we're so desperate for information. Because when we ask God for peace, we're not really asking for peace, we're asking for clarity, you know? And you can't have both. A peace of God surpasses understanding. So when you come to church and ask for God's peace and then we leave and we go pursuing information or details or how exactly am I going to cross that Jordan River, we wonder why we forfeit the peace of God. And that's because you can't have peace and understanding. Choose. Every time I'd pray about it and be like, God, am I meant to move to Lakeland? I really feel like I've got a lot of peace about it, but what about a job? What am I going to do here? Who am I going to live with? I felt this anxiety and I felt God so strongly, confirmed by some incredible wise counsel around me, say, Elyse, it's time. You've laid down your life for ministry. Now let God give you this. So January this year, I moved to Lakeland, Florida, no job. And I have seen God do miracles like you wouldn't believe. And the people that I hired at Oasis Church, here's how God moves in the details. The people that I had hired without even knowing it at Oasis in Los Angeles, The job that became vacant at this church, because I hired them from this church without realizing it, was the exact job that Tim moved here to fulfill. See, when you would surrender the details to God, you'll see that He's been moving behind the scenes the whole time, church. God doesn't waste any details. Oh, and Zara, the 6-year-old who is now my daughter, was born in the very midst of my divorce. What's that verse? The things that you sow with tears, you'll reap with joy. So what's He asking you to surrender? Today, can I have you standing at this campus, wherever you are, if you're able? There was a verse that I read at the start. You thought I forgot, right? The parable of the hidden treasure. It didn't make sense to me until yesterday. Because at first I see that this man that goes to this field and finds this hidden treasure and leaves and just buys the whole field. I'm like, that is so irresponsible, sir. What happens if there's a change in the economy? You're not even gonna get a Zestimate before you offer them some money? Like, what is going on? But then I realize there's something so much more powerful than me preaching a sermon to you. And it's the revelation and experience that you get from God firsthand in your own life about what it looks like to find the goodness of God and get rid of everything else. See, when you have experienced what it looks like to surrender to God and see Him come through, suddenly the treasure of knowing Him, the treasure of seeing Him part the Jordan Sea in front of you, the treasure of seeing Him restore your family and never lose a year during the single season in between, the treasure of seeing Him restore your community even when you left a church and were wandering in a wilderness of loneliness, trusting God to give you back a family. You can't take that away from me. Have anything else, I'm good. But then I read the parable again and I noticed something different. We're not the man in the parable. Jesus is. See, church, the reason that we can surrender to God, the reason that we can go all in, the reason that we can be strong and courageous and step out even in uncertainty, even on shaky ground, even when our voice is still afraid, the reason we can do that is because 2,000 years ago, Jesus did it before us. He went first. He showed us how. And guess what? You are His treasure and you are the one that He went after. And it doesn't matter what mess you find yourself in today. He says, I would do it again. For the joy set before me, I will endure the cross. Friend, He loves you. So we're going to go back into worship right now, but I want you to ask yourself, what's that thing? Where do you need to surrender? Where do you need to release control today to God? Be strong and courageous. And let's go and cross that Jordan River together. Come on, church, let's worship.